Hello and welcome. Whenever we talk about economics, the whole debate feels like it's boxed into two corners, right? You've got pure capitalism on one side, pure socialism on the other. But what about all that space in between? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into today. This really popular idea of a middle way.
So that brings us right to the big question for this whole explainer. Can a society really blend a free market with government control and create a system that's stable, sustainable in the long run? It's a super compelling idea, but the real question is, does this middle ground actually have a solid foundation? Let's find out.
All right, first things first, we need to get a handle on what this third way actually is. It's an idea that pops up all the time in political debates, and let's be honest, it's pretty much the default system for most of the developed world today.
And it just makes sense on the surface, doesn't it? People who support it say it's the best of both worlds. You get the engine of the market creating growth, but you use the government to step in and fix things. Handle market failures, provide social safety nets, make society a bit more fair. The whole goal is to get all the good stuff from capitalism while sanding off its rough edges.
Now, this idea actually has a specific name in economics: interventionism. And what's really interesting here is this definition, which comes from the economist Ludwig von Mises. The key word here is interferes. The goal isn't to totally get rid of the market, it's to steer it, to use commands and prohibitions to get different results than the market would produce on its own.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. On one end of the spectrum, you've got pure capitalism, where the government is basically just a referee. On the complete opposite end, pure socialism, with total central planning. Interventionism, it sits right there in the middle, creating what Mises called a hampered market. It's a system that's not quite one thing and not quite the other.
But here's the million-dollar question. Is this middle system actually stable? Well, one economist, Ludwig von Mises, made a powerful case that it's not. His argument is a pretty serious challenge to the whole idea of a permanent third way.
Okay, so this is the crucial point. Mises didn't just say he disliked interventionism. He argued it was fundamentally unstable. He claimed that these government interventions, no matter how well-intentioned, always end up creating brand new problems. And those problems are often way worse than the ones they were trying to solve in the first place. And his whole critique wasn't about politics or morality or anything like that. As you can see from this quote, he was asking a purely technical question. Do these policies actually work? Can they get the job done that their own supporters want them to do? He looked at it as a completely value-free analysis of cause and effect. So how does this instability actually play out in the real world? This is where the theory gets really fascinating, because we can start to look at this chain reaction of unintended consequences.
Let's kick things off with a simple, really common type of intervention. Imagine the government sees the price of milk is getting high. To help people out, it puts a legal cap on how much milk can sell for. The goal seems noble, right? Make an essential product more affordable for everybody. But just look at the domino effect this sets off. First, the price cap is imposed. But that leads directly to step 2, a shortage. And why? Well, because the dairy farmers who were just barely making a profit before, now they can't afford to operate at all, so they stop producing milk. The policy has completely backfired. So, to fix this new problem, the government gets pushed into step 3. It now has to expand its controls even further down the supply chain, creating this cycle of intervention that pushes everything away from the market and more toward full-blown central planning. Here's another really fascinating example of how this logic works. Let's say a government mandates something, like a 2-hour lunch break. That raises costs for local businesses, and pretty soon they just can't compete with companies overseas. The direct result? People start losing their jobs. But instead of getting rid of that costly regulation, the government often tries to fix it with another intervention, a tariff on foreign goods. Now, the jobs might be saved, but the cost of that original policy is now hidden, and it's being paid for by every single consumer through higher prices. Mises actually called this the necessary complement to domestic intervention. Okay, let's switch gears and look at a massive area of intervention that affects pretty much everyone: government social security programs and the debt that can come with them. Mises used this simple Paul and Peter analogy to really cut through the confusion. Think about it like this. Back in 1940, a guy named Paul pays into the system. But that money isn't saved or invested for him. The government spends it right away and just gives Paul an IOU. Fast forward a few decades. Now, a totally different person, Peter, has to be taxed to pay off Paul's IOU from way back when. So it's not really a savings plan. It's a system of transferring obligations from one generation to the next. And this quote just drives that point home.
The whole argument that public debt isn't a burden because, we owe it to ourselves is, in Mises's words, a delusion. The Pauls of 1940 don't owe it to themselves. It's the Peters of 1970 who owe it to the Pauls of 1940. It's a system designed to push today's financial promises onto tomorrow's citizens.
So all of these examples, the price controls, the tariffs, Social Security, they all lead Mises to one single powerful conclusion about where this middle way ultimately ends up.
Those unintended consequences we've been talking about, they don't just go away. They create new problems, new crises that force policymakers to a crossroads. That hampered market becomes impossible to manage, and sooner or later, a choice has to be made.
And here is that choice, laid out plain and simple. On one side, you can reverse the interventions and head back toward a free market. Or you can double down with even more interventions to try and fix the failures of the last ones, which pushes the system step by step toward total government control. According to this analysis, there is no stable, permanent third option. You're always on a path to one side or the other.
And that brings us to our final and maybe most critical question. This theory was developed almost 100 years ago, but it really forces us to look at our own economies today. If interventionism really is an unstable path that always leads toward one of two extremes, it leaves us with a really provocative thought. Where on that path are we right now?